I ended things with my ex a few years back. Her drug use had spiraled out of control. Pills at first, then whatever she could get her hands on. She became careless, unable to hold a job or take care of herself, and I couldn't keep waiting for her to change. My ability to sleep through anything didn't help. I'd wake up to find her gone at 3 a.m., having slipped out while I was dead asleep. The relationship wasn't working for me, so I ended it and took my spare keys back from her. The few months after the breakup were quiet and peaceful. I was enjoying my single life, just going through the days. One night, though, I was coming home from the gym and parked on the street. As I got out of the car, I saw a woman in all black standing outside a window on the right side of my house, as if she was trying to peer inside. This was definitely unsettling, so I decided to approach her. I walked up to her, but as soon as she saw me, she quickly turned and fled. I watched her run off into the dark. I didn't recognize her at all, and I wasn't sure what to do next. The next week passed without issue, though I made sure to check all the doors and windows were locked each night. One morning I woke to the sound of rustling outside my bedroom window. It sounded like something moving around in a bush. My first thought was of that woman I'd seen looking through the windows the week before, but I quickly got out of bed and threw on some clothes. The blinds were down, so I knew nobody could see in, but I still needed to check for myself. I didn't want to bother the police just because a squirrel was in the bush, so I pulled the blinds open. Nothing. I leaned closer to the window to check the outside of the house, but still, there was no one there. I sighed, feeling a wave of relief, and carried on with my morning. Later I went to work, grabbed dinner at Wendy's, then hit the gym, before coming home late again. Feeling tired, I decided to head to bed early. I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something terrifying. The window was open, just a small gap at the bottom, but I knew I had locked it. Someone had broken in. I went over to examine it closely and then slammed it shut and locked it. It felt violating and unnerving, like someone had crossed a boundary that shouldn't be crossed, intruding into my personal space. My phone buzzed with texts from my ex. Her messages went on about how much she missed sleeping next to me, missed the comfort of my bed, and seeing me first thing in the morning when she woke up. She said that it would happen again soon. She mentioned how she always liked seeing me in muscle shirts, and I realized I was wearing one at that moment, just home from the gym. It felt off, but I tried to brush it off. It wasn't unusual for me to wear one. Still, something didn't feel right. I texted back, telling her to lose my number and to never contact me again, before turning my phone on silent as another message from her came through. I started making my way slowly through the house. As I approached my bedroom door, I thought I heard a creaking sound coming from inside. I turned the knob slowly and pushed the door open. My heart was pounding in my chest. I searched the entire room, closet, under the bed, behind curtains, but found nothing. I thought I heard a door close quietly in my house, but I quickly dismissed it, figuring I must have been on edge from the text messages. I checked every other room in the house multiple times, but there was no sign anyone had been there. I tried to sleep that night, but kept waking up at every small noise. The next day passed normally, and I started to feel a bit more at ease. That night, I was so exhausted after my gym session that I fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. The next morning, I opened my eyes to find my ex lying next to me naked in my bed, staring at me with a wild smile on her face, and my sharpest kitchen knife in her hand. She told me she knew this would happen, just like she said it would in her text messages from the other night. Her face was sunken, dark circles under her eyes. She was clearly high as a kite. She held the knife to her wrist, saying she'd do something stupid if I didn't take her back. I managed to escape and lock myself in my bathroom and then call the police. They made it pretty fast. I unlocked the bathroom door, saw my ex passed out on the bed through the bedroom door, knife still in hand. I removed the knife, covered her up, then returned it to the kitchen before letting the police in the front door. A female officer woke her up and helped get her dressed. When they searched her belongings, they found my spare keys in her pocket. She must have taken it the night she broke in through the window, and since I hadn't noticed anything missing, I didn't realize the key was gone until now. After a few more minutes, 2 officers dragged my ex toward their car. As they passed me in the living room, she kept begging to get back together, saying she knew what she did was wrong and that she couldn't imagine living her life without me. Thankfully, that was the last time I ever saw or heard from her. I just hope she's okay and hasn't done something reckless. Finding her in my bed like that, with the knife, made me realize how lucky I was to wake up at all. The summer I turned 15, I came home from boarding school to stay with my dad. He lived in a small town outside Alexandria, Louisiana, on 15 acres of land. It was far away from my friends, my school, and anything I actually wanted to do. But I didn't have a choice. I was stuck there until school started again. The moment I arrived, my dad took my phone away. My room was the same as always, bare walls with an old mattress on the floor, and hardly anything else. My dad had strict rules. I wasn't allowed to leave the house without permission, even for small things. That's how my summer started and carried on for the next 3 months. However, there were some days when my dad was in a good mood and he had actually allowed me to go on walks. Those walks kept me sane. I'd head out with my dad's dog and walk for hours, just to get away from the house. I'd walk laps around the small neighborhood near my dad's place, since it was the only paved road around, whenever I was allowed. A month after I arrived, my dad began to notice something was wrong around the property. Garbage was scattered around, and the planter boxes under the windows were getting crushed. At first he thought it was me. I denied anything to do with it. Our house sat far off the road, surrounded by woods, with no curtains on any of the windows, not even in the bathroom. It was creepy, but my dad didn't seem at all bothered. I didn't pay it much attention. I was more focused on just getting through the summer. Then, in mid-June, while out walking, I passed a house I'd seen a dozen times. A man in his 30s was outside and waved me over. At first, it didn't seem strange, a typical small town where people were friendly. I thought maybe he recognized me from walking past his house so often. He began asking all sorts of questions about my dad's dog, like what breed it was and how old it was. Next, he asked if he could take a picture of the dog for his mom. Something felt wrong, but I didn't want to be rude, so I said yes. I wasn't even looking at the camera, just staring at my hands, waiting for it to end. When he finished, I tried to walk away, but he kept talking. Then he switched to asking about me, where I lived, how long I'd been living in the area, and if I had other pets. I started feeling uncomfortable. I told him my dad was waiting for me and walked away. That night, I asked my dad if he knew the guy, but he didn't know him, so I dropped it. I didn't want to push it and risk losing my walks. They were the only time I had any freedom. A few days later, my dad was in a good mood and let me stay up late to watch TV, something I hadn't been allowed to do since I got home. The living room had nothing but windows. No curtains, no blinds, just open glass looking outside. I stayed up until 3 a.m., eating snacks and watching whatever came on. That night had been the highlight of my summer, but that quickly changed in the morning when my dad woke me up furious. A chair was sitting beneath my bedroom window. Our house was built on a raised foundation, so there had to be something for someone to stand on if they wanted to look in. Outside, we had a patio set, but one of the chairs had been moved. I insisted I hadn't touched it. The only reason he didn't press me further was because the window didn't open. I couldn't have climbed out even if I tried. We reported it to the police. They really couldn't do anything. After that, my dad refused to let me leave the house for walks. I was annoyed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few nights later, I started waking up to a noise coming from the back door. It wasn't light or hesitant. It was a hard rattling sound. It was loud, like someone was yanking at the lock. It went on for 3 nights straight. My dad wasn't going to ignore it anymore. He poured talcum powder all over the back patio and rubbed some on the doorknob to see if anything left a mark. The following morning, there were footprints all over the patio. The doorknob had no talcum powder left on it. We reported it to the police again. They couldn't have cared less. Not long after, summer ended, and I went back to school. I didn't think much about it again until Thanksgiving break, when I came home for a few days. I barely left the house. Then, in February, I came home for a short visit. That's when my dad told me something that hit me hard. While Dad was unloading groceries, a man pulled into the driveway and asked about me. He described me clearly, said I was beautiful, polite, and mentioned he hadn't seen me around lately. Then he brought up my dad's dog, saying it had wandered over to his house on Thanksgiving. But the dog had been inside with me the whole time. Even when I was inside, he had been watching me. Archie was never much of a guard dog. If someone broke in, he'd probably just sleep through it. My dad started asking around and found out where the man lived. When he told me, I realized the truth. It was the same man I met that summer. My dad moved to California to be closer to my school. I never saw that man again. This happened to me 3 or 4 years ago now. I was around 25 at the time. I'm a female, and I live in Canada. One night, I was heading home after attending a small cosplay event in Toronto. My overnight bus to Montreal was scheduled to leave at 11:30 p.m. So I arrived at the terminal with some time to spare and boarded. The bus was mostly empty, just a few scattered passengers. I'm a fairly solitary person. All I require are my headphones and music, and I'm set. I found my seat, which was near the back, put my headphones in, and settled in for the ride. So far, so good, until I noticed out of the corner of my eye a figure approach and sit right beside me. It was a man, fairly built, greasy black hair, glasses, wearing a black hoodie over a dark shirt, and a creepy-ass smile. He wasn't up to anything much yet, just looking at my phone screen. I could hear him breathing hard, not like he was in pain, but like he was feeling something strongly. It bothered me. The bus wasn't crowded, so I moved further back to get away from him. I chose a new seat, sat down, put on my headset, and continued on with the rest of the trip. In the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure getting bigger, and I felt a draft on my skin. I realized it was the guy, sitting next to me again. He looked at me with dead eyes, a creepy grin, staring straight at my phone. I panicked. There were still hours left. I had nowhere else to go. I looked around at the other passengers and considered moving closer, thinking that strength comes in numbers. But the nearest woman had moved against the window, asleep. Others were spread out across the bus, some dozing off, others focused on their phones. No one seemed to notice what was happening. I stood up and moved a few rows forward, picking a seat closer to where more people were sitting. At least I wasn't alone in the back with him. A few hours into the trip, the bus pulled into a rest stop for a short break. I decided to step out for some fresh air and stretch my legs. It was a quiet, dimly lit gas station with a convenience store and a few parked cars. Most passengers stayed on the bus, but I spotted the man stepping out as well. I walked rather fast for a few minutes toward the bus, thinking I'd be safer once I got inside. Right then, a hand gripped my wrist and pulled me back. Another covered my mouth before I could make a noise. My heart pounded as I realized who it was. It was him, the same man with the black hoodie, black hair, and dead eyes. He was angry, ranting on about me running away from him, demanding to know why I was avoiding him. He said I should be honored that he was paying attention to me. I was pinned, my phone buried in my bag, no way to call for help. Not knowing what else to do, I did the most desperate thing I could come up with. I went along with it. I lowered my head and muttered an apology. It worked. His hold eased just enough. He dropped his guard and let go of my wrist. He asked for my phone number and address, but I refused, saying I'd rather add him on Instagram, which he accepted. I told him I'd reach for my phone, but instead, I picked up the can of bear spray I carried for self-defense, since carrying pepper spray is illegal in Canada. Without thinking, I aimed and sprayed. He immediately staggered back, choking on the bear spray. I didn't wait. I ran straight for the bus, yelling for help. The driver radioed for the police while the other passengers looked around, confused. Within 5 minutes, officers arrived. They found him still on the ground, barely able to breathe, his face red and swollen. Apparently, he had a history of harassing women, though no one had pressed serious charges before. That night, he wasn't getting away with it. I made it back to my seat, still shaking, but relieved. The rest of the ride to Montreal passed in silence. Even though he was gone, I kept looking over my shoulder the entire way,